Strength can become isolating, not because you intended to, and not because you push people away, but because the more stable you appear, the fewer people assume that you need support. And over time, something subtle happens. You become the strong one, the the steady one, the one that others lean on. And very few people lean back toward you. Strong leaders don't fall apart because they're weak. They fall apart because they've tried to carry everything alone. That's why strong leaders still need a small inner circle. Here's the tension: the stronger you are publicly, the harder it is to become honest privately. You don't want to sound uncertain. You don't want to burden your team. And you don't want to destabilize momentum. So, what do? You absorb, you filter, you carry, and eventually you realize something. Strength without proximity becomes isolation. Leadership requires stability, but stability doesn't mean solitude. Here's a quiet danger in being the strongest person in the room. When no one challenges you, you slowly stop being sharpened. When no one sees behind the decisions, you slowly lose your perspective. When no one knows what you're wrestling with, you slowly become insulated. And insulation feels safe at first, but insulation eventually becomes drift. I've experienced this in subtle ways. Seasons where everything looks strong on the outside, the growth, the clarity, the momentum, but internally I notice something. Fewer honest conversations, fewer people asking me the hard questions, fewer spaces where I didn't have to be on. That's it's just not sustainable. Strength needs friction. Not public friction, but trusted friction. There's a difference between advisors and allies. Advisors help you make decisions. An inner circle helps you stay grounded. They aren't impressed by your role. They aren't intimidated by your title. They don't need something from you. They care about who you are becoming, not just what you're building. And that's rare because the more visible you become, the more people relate to your output instead of your character. Strong leaders don't need many voices. They need a few honest ones. Ones who can say, "Hey, you're moving too fast," or "You're carrying too much. You're right, but your tone is off. You're strong, but you're tired." That kind of voice protects your integrity. Leadership slowly turns into a function. You become the decision maker, the stabilizer, the one with all the answers. But if you're not careful, you forget you are still human. You have limits. You have blind spots, things you don't see. You still have emotional thresholds. So an inner circle reminds you of that, not to weaken you, but to humanize you. See, I've learned this personally. There are conversations I simply can't have publicly, not because I'm hiding something, but because timing and responsibility, they matter. But I can't afford to have those conversations nowhere. Leaders who suppress everything, eventually they fracture. Leaders who process wisely, they endure. An inner circle isn't a group chat. It isn't public sounding board. It isn't an emotional dumping. It's small, it's intentional, and it's earned over time. It's built on trust, not convenience. And it requires humility because inviting people close enough To see your uncertainty means surrendering to the illusion of control. Strong leaders, they struggle with that. Where we're used to carrying, we're used to stabilizing, we're used to absorbing pressure. But strength that never opens up eventually becomes brittle. There's a belief that many leaders carry quietly. Hey, if I can handle it, I should. That belief, it feels noble, but it's also incomplete. You might be able to handle it, but that doesn't mean you're meant to handle it alone. There's a difference. See, maturity isn't independence. It's interdependence without dependency. And that balance is what preserves strength for decades, not just seasons. There was a period where I believed being strong meant being internally contained. If I could process it myself, I would. If I could carry it quietly, I did. And externally, everything on the outside looked fine, but I noticed something. Decision fatigue, it increased. Internal pressures lingered longer. Clarity felt heavier than it should. Not because the decisions were wrong, but because they were unshared. I had strength, but I had to minimize proximity. And that's when I realized strong leaders, they don't need crowds, they need alignment. An inner circle doesn't exist to make leadership easier, guys. It exists to make leadership sustainable, and it keeps your thinking sharp. It keeps your motives examined, and it keeps your heart soft. And that last part, it matters because leadership without softness eventually becomes mechanical. And your people can feel that. The strongest leaders I know aren't isolated, they are anchored, anchored to conviction, anchored to a few trusted voices, anchored to something deeper than performance. So I'll leave you with this. Strength doesn't eliminate the need for support. It increases the responsibility to choose that support wisely. See, here's what I've learned. If you're leading something meaningful, you don't need many people that are close. You need just a few. Not to validate you, definitely not to manage you, but to remind you that you are more than the role that you carry. And that reminder might be the difference between lasting leadership and quiet burnout.